Chapter 65. Brides and Babies. Late 1940s. Chivalry. Scottish Serenade. The boys chivaried their brother after dark. Perry Ray Harness was attending Prairie View Baptist Church with his family, where he met Martha Jane Parker. She preferred to be called Jane, and her family lived on a farm about a mile west of Prairie View Church. Perry had dated girls, but this one was of greater interest to him. Jane had a clerical job at Boone County Hardware on the southwest corner of the town square in Harrison. She was born to parents Lester and Georgia Parker, December 14, 1927, grew up on the farm, and graduated from Harrison High School in 1946. The Parkers had a Jersey cow operation and produced milk. The Jersey cow was first brought to Boone County via the railroad, and Nath Miller, original Miller Hardware founder, opened a creamery near the Crooked Creek Bridge on Main Street in Harrison. Jerseys were excellent producers of butterfat, especially when fed clover grass or hay. The demand for milk, cheese, butter, and ice cream created many small dairies throughout the Ozarks. The hills grew grasses better than row crops, so pasture and hay increasingly were being grown. Most farms had a few milk cows, and even families living on the edge of town had a milk cow or two. Perry Harness, age 24, and Jane Parker, age 22, were married in Harrison on June 26, 1949, by Reverend E. E. Griever, the pastor of the First Baptist Church. The private service was held at the home of Naomi Parker, Jane's aunt, who was also the county clerk, and she recorded their marriage license. Their first home was an apartment in Harrison, and later they built their first home on the Parker Jersey farm. The purple limestone veneer house still stands today. The fourth son of Riley and Melinda Harness was Daniel Troy, and he would be the last of the older boys to marry at age 27. Troy caught a glimpse of Barbara Downham's valedictorian picture in the newspaper, and upon learning of her intelligence, he claimed to have said, "That woman can make me a living." He always loved to tease and embellish his stories for fun, so I think this was more of a tale than a quote. Barbara married Troy on June 2nd, 1950, by Pastor E. E. Edward Elmer Griever Sr. in a private ceremony at First Baptist Church in Harrison. His sister Veda and her boyfriend Gene Mathis were the witnesses. Troy wanted to keep his plans a secret and not let his brothers know anything about what he was up to. However, his younger brother Roy was pilfering one day through the glove box of Troy's car and found a wedding ring hidden inside a glove. He put it back and informed the older brothers of his find. They began to spy on Troy, wondering where he might be fixing a place for them to stay when they got married. Troy would drive south from work like he was going toward Prairie View in an attempt to put his brothers off his trail. Then he'd circle back north to an upstairs rental house on Prospect Avenue near the Rose Hill Cemetery. When the boys realized Troy was backtracking them, they secretly went to the apartment with a load of worn-out, junky furniture that was discarded by a store and set it up in the apartment as if it was Troy's touch of housekeeping for his new bride. It was a lot of work for just a laugh. After the couple married and were settled in their apartment, Clifford, Perry, Roy, and others chivaried Troy. It was an old tradition of mountain folks from the motherland of Scotland to have some fun initiating a couple into the community. Following the honeymoon, when a couple were first at their new home, folks came after dark and started shouting and making loud noises to awaken anyone from their sleep. Clanging cowbells or beating on pots and pans. They chanted for the groom to come out and push his bride in a wheelbarrow, so all could laugh and cheer the foolishness. The practice often was no more than a threat to a young couple that they might get chivaried. The raucous was never intended to hurt anyone, and I recall seeing it done on the Andy Griffin Show. Troy and Barbara bought the abandoned Bain School property, which had been consolidated with Harrison Schools years before. It was known as School Number 122, and Troy demolished the old structure and used its stone steps for his new home. A hand pump over a well still exists on the property, and some of the bur oak trees remain from the early days of it being part of Baker Prairie. Bur oaks are fire-resistant due to their thick bark, so prairie wildfires did not threaten their survival. The first Baines schoolhouse dates from the 1860s when Mr. Baines had a store and post office there. At that time, Harrison did not exist as a town. The first schoolhouse burned down, and a new schoolhouse was built, which stood until Troy bought the land from the school district. Many years before, some of the Baines family moved to Texas near Stonewall, where the mother, Rebecca Baines, would marry Samuel Johnson. Among their children born to them was Lyndon Baines Johnson, LBJ, who became the 36th President of the United States in 1963. While he was serving, it was discussed by local leaders of Harrison to invite him to come and dedicate the new post office and perhaps visit the site of the Baines schoolhouse. However, he was unable to come, and the hopes of him having coffee with Troy and Barbara at their home never materialized. I have visited the LBJ Ranch in Texas, toured the grounds, and read a biography about him. He was unscrupulous, in my opinion, and undeserving of Lady Bird Johnson as a wife. I love how she initiated the Roadside Beautification Act of 1965. Down in Searcy County, Giles was living with his wife, Ellen Horton Firestone, married 1931, on the Horton farm she had inherited just north of the newly formed Bear Creek School. Happy Hollow, Bohannon, and Cooper schools were all consolidated into the Bear Creek School. Today, the old Bear Creek Schoolhouse is visible as a barn. The Welcome Home schoolhouse was modernized with electricity, and a large storm cellar was added. The railroad was abandoned going south from Harrison into Searcy County, never to return. Roads were improving slowly throughout the hills, but the lack of industry caused many to leave or to never return to the Ozarks. Searcy County would lag in commercial growth compared to other counties in northwest Arkansas for decades to come. The Arkansas Democrat-Gazette reported in 1948 that the Flint Rock Strawberry Growers Association of Searcy County had sales of 900 to 500 crates of strawberries at 24 quarts per crate. That's a lot of berries. The crate size was later reduced to 16 quarts around 1960. The county boasted to be the strawberry capital of the world. According to an old article in the Marshall Mountain Wave, the county's peak year for strawberries was in 1956, when there were around 1,800 acres of strawberries. The hillsides around Morning Star allowed the berries to ripen on its flint gravel rocks with less rotting. Children were used extensively for pickers, and school was scheduled around harvest as well as celebration of the first crate of berries to be harvested. The prize grew to become $100 before it gradually ended. By the time 1950 rolled around, Riley and Melinda had all their children near them and the beginning of many grandchildren to follow. Kenny Vale Jr., harness. Danny Ray, harness. Willa Jo, harness. Gary Lee, harness. Additionally, Riley influenced his sister Arizona and her husband Elmer Vick to buy a small farm, part of Mel Harness's land today, joining Earl and Emily's farm. Their children were as follows: Arlen Vick, Harley Vick, Harvey Vick, Gindel Imogene Vick, McKinley Vick, Della Ann Vick. Elmer Vick was 68 years old in 1963 and fell dead in his front yard of heart failure. Arizona struggled with losing him, and she had spells of pain which made her cry out with a wail. One day, Gary Harness was left to keep an eye on his aunt. He was about 8 years old, and when Arizona let out one of her hair-raising wails, Gary wanted to run for cover. He said it probably scared him for life, and still is like a nightmare experience to recall. Arlen Vick was tall, and the Harness boys would use the expression, "as tall as Arlen Vick," for anyone with exceptional height. He took a job working for Clifford Harness at the radiator shop. He married Lola Brown, and they lived in a travel trailer near where Alan and Hannah Hickman live today. Lola would buy white cotton feed sacks from Earl Harness for 5 cents and sew underwear, using the cotton sack fabric for her family. Poverty was a way of life still, for many living in the Ozarks. When McKinley Vick was very young, the younger Roy and James Harness would ask him if he had been eating soakins. A soakin was when you took a biscuit and soaked up some coffee with it, like dunking a donut. When Roy would ask in an accusing tone of voice if McKinley had been eating them, little McKinley's lower lip would quiver in fear as he confessed, "But I just love them soakins." The interrogation was repeated many times to entertain themselves with Lil McKinley's emotional response. In August of 1947, Chester Ruff, Roy Harness, and Ewell Sanders were baptized in Crooked Creek. The record shows that in March of 1948, that Richard and Lenny Ruff, with Doris G.T. and Gwendolyn, requested a letter for membership which would indicate they had moved to North Little Rock, Arkansas. L.R. Goodson was pastor at Prairie View in 1948. In 1949, Earl Harness was ordained as a deacon of the church. Gene Mathis was baptized in July of 1949. Barbara Rose Downham Harness was saved and baptized at the Prairie View Baptist Church in 1950, and Martha Jane Parker Harness also was saved and baptized at that same time. Brother L.W. Chadwick was pastor in 1950. Riley and Melinda lived on the Arnold farm, south of Earl and Emily, through the 1950s. They milked a few cows and raised some hogs. With chickens and a large garden, they continued to grow much of their own food. Veda Jo Harness was the oldest child still living at home, and she graduated from Bellefonte High School, where she played basketball. Veda met Clinton Eugene Matthews, and they married on April 22, 1950, at Prairie View Baptist Church. Troy and Barbara Harness were their best man and maid of honor. Veda Jo worked as a secretary for Caterpillar Tractor and the city of Harrison. Gene took a job working as a salesman for a new wholesaler in Harrison called Merchant Supply Company and later renamed Savastop. Reflection. 4 of Riley and Melinda's sons had survived the worst war in modern times, and now each had their own wives and homes. All 4 sons had started families, and the Harness clan was on the increase. Combining hard work and Christian ethics, they had a sense of being an example of what it meant to be good citizens of the community. When it goes well with the righteous, the city rejoices. By the blessing of the upright, the city is exalted. Proverbs 11:10-11.